Let me ask you a question as we get started. Have you ever been in a seemingly helpless situation? And I say seemingly helpless because there's always help. You just have to know where to ask for it. But maybe for you, you found yourself in a seemingly helpless situation. You know, I read stories all the time about people who are in dire circumstances. They're in survival situations in places far removed or in their foreign countries. And in my own experiences, as I was reflecting on this in preparation, I couldn't quite think of a moment where I was truly helpless or found myself in a place like that, except for this one time where I was in Mississippi, which could seem foreign and dire to you depending on who you are. We were on a mission trip to East Tennessee with my fraternity when I was in college, and we were on our way back, and about 50 of us had gone, and we had caravanned on our way from Texas to East Tennessee and had a great week. And my car decided that we wanted to take a separate route. We wanted to break off from the caravan because we wanted to experience a little more of the Deep South. So we broke off and we started to drive, and we got about 15 miles from the Mississippi River right outside of Vicksburg when the guy who was driving, Matt Rogers, and I won't say whether he was following the speed limit or not, but we rear-ended a tow truck and he totaled the front of his car. It was a scary circumstance for the five of us who were in the SUV at the time, but nobody was hurt, thank God, by his grace. But we were stranded on the side of the road, and to add insult to injury, the tow truck we hit, which was fine, would not give us a ride where we needed to go next. So we were stranded, waiting for the state troopers to come, and again, we were in a little town in Mississippi called Flowers, which there's nothing there. I'm going to offend somebody. There's not much in Flowers. And so the state trooper was kind enough to give three of us a ride to Vicksburg. The problem was, we didn't know anybody in Vicksburg either. We were stranded. We couldn't rent a car. We were too young. We couldn't get to any public transportation. We were seemingly helpless. Then it hit me. I had a friend who I met at college. This was my freshman year, and he actually became one of my roommates later on, and he was from Jackson, Mississippi, which was, about an hour east of us. And I called him in a panic and said, "Do you know anybody who could come to get us?" Within an hour and a half of that phone call, two friends came, Bo and David. Didn't know Bo and David, never met them before. But they pulled up with smiles on their faces and said, "Does anybody need a ride back to Jackson, Mississippi?" They came and they drove us back and allowed us to get into a safe place where we could get where we were going to. Now, here's why this stands out to me is, as I don't remember the conversations we had. I mean, all of it's kind of a blur. It happened so fast. I don't remember the conversations and trying to figure out where we needed to go. I don't even remember too much of what David and Bo said on our drive back to Jackson, but what I'll never forget is their faces. Not grumbling at all. Who knows what they were doing on that Saturday night as they were getting ready to go out and have a great time or whatever they were going to do. But with gratitude, they came to help out some strangers in need. It fulfilled something that all of us want deep down inside. We all want to know that someone cares enough to act. And in Luke 10, we look at this very, very familiar parable, one of the most familiar in all Scripture, that of the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells this story, and if you know the parable, then you might be inclined to tune me out in the moments ahead because it's so familiar. But don't allow your familiarity with this text to take away from the radical mercy that is demonstrated by this man used by God to demonstrate what a Christ-like love is all about. Now, Jesus tells this story because it represents very much who Jesus was. This familiarity with this story should lead us as well to exhibit a kind of radical mercy that exhibits a costly act of sacrifice. This is what Christ has done for us. This is what Jesus challenges this lawyer to live with. And it's for us also to pick up this mantle and demonstrate it to those around us who are in need. It tells us about a love that goes above and beyond what is expected of us or what others expect of what God can do. And that's the premise of this whole series. We've been looking at the embodiment of love, Jesus, and the way in which he encountered people who were in need. And what we find in his love is that love does this. It meets people where they are while leading them towards who God created them to become. The love of Jesus is not transactional in nature. It is transformative. It is something that meets people relationally. It pulls someone out of the status quo and moves them to something more glorious. Our world has redefined love as just kind of accepting people as they are and just leaving them in that place. That's sort of warm and fuzzy, but that's not what God intended. In a world corrupted with sin and lostness, we're being moved towards foundness and towards what it means to live in the abundant life with Jesus Christ. Now, when we think of this kind of sacrificial love, this service that the Good Samaritan embodies, this love in action, I venture to say that everyone in this room has somebody, or I pray you do, somebody in your life who you're willing to sacrifice yourself for. You have somebody that you love so much that you would die for them. But the real challenge of this parable is, what are you willing to sacrifice for a stranger? That's a real litmus test of Christ-like love. It's not necessarily who you love in familiarity or in a familial sense, but are you willing to demonstrate this love to those who are desperately in need, who you don't even know, but whom you see, whom God knows personally? We live in a world filled with good intentions and well wishes, but genuine service requires something more. We're looking at these in light of Gary Chapman's 5 love languages, and acts of service are an important way in which we demonstrate love. He defines them as something expressing love through actions that ease another person's burdens and help meet practical needs. You know this. Actions speak louder than words, and for some people, that is especially true. They need you to demonstrate how much you love in the acts that you demonstrate for them. Jesus never reduced service to just transactional helpfulness. The service of Christ that we're challenged to, that he embodies, is one that demonstrates a transformational hospitality. Christian service does something more. It commits to continue until the work of love is complete. And with that in mind, I want to talk about the kind of love that's put into action, the kind of love that Jesus showed, the kind of love that you're challenged to live into each and every day. And with that in mind, let's look at this familiar parable that we find in Luke chapter 10, where we see love in action. Luke chapter 10, we're going to look at verses 29 through 37 together. By the way, there's a Bible provided in the pew in front of you. These words will be on the screen behind me as well, as we consider what it means to live with love in action. Again, Luke 10, starting verse 29. I'm going to read out loud. You listen where you are. This is what the scripture says. But he, this lawyer, desiring to justify himself, said to Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" Jesus replied, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell among robbers, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance a priest was going down that road, and when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. So likewise a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion." Now let's put this in context of this greater conversation that Jesus is having. This is about halfway through Jesus' ministry. He has been serving faithfully. He has met others along the way. He has healed. He has been interrupted time and time again and showed love. We looked at it last week with the parable with the story of the bleeding woman who touched Jesus' hem of his garment and was healed of her affliction. This touch of love that changed her, transformed her completely. Jesus had done this over and over and over again. And here he gets to the heart of why he does what he does in a story, in a parable. And again, this lawyer is trying to figure out things. He's trying to kind of stump Jesus. And he asks then, "Who is my neighbor?" Now, what he's not really looking for is how he can demonstrate more love. What he's looking for is, what are the boundaries? What are the limits of the love I have to show? When you're asking questions of what I have to do, you're asking the wrong questions. The joy of the Christian life is what we get to do out of a gratitude for what Christ has done for us. And Jesus looks at this lawyer and he says, this goes beyond the stretch of what you thought possible. Jesus wants to shatter his desired boundaries of this lawyer, and he wants to do the same for you. Unbeknownst to yourself, you probably set boundaries around yourself about who you're going to love, how far you're going to do it, and that could be influenced by many different things. But Jesus' call to radical mercy calls for something more. The story begins on a dangerous stretch of road. It's a road between Jerusalem and Jericho, and if you've gone to the Holy Land, then you've been up that road. A lot of tourists start going to the north side of the Sea of Galilee. You come down, and then you go up. And this was a common pilgrim's road. And even today, when you're going up that road, it's full of hills. There's blind spots all around you. And so this would be a common place for a band of robbers to be in order to attack those who are going from these two significant cities, Jericho and Jerusalem. And so it happened that this man fell into the hands of some ne'er-dwellers, and they did just that. They beat him, they stripped him of his clothes, they left him for dead. And in the midst of this man's helpless state, we find some you would assume to be some usual suspects for some heroes, certainly in this kind of time period. First comes this priest. Here comes this man who's on his way. Who knows if he's coming from his work in Jerusalem or coming towards his work. Whatever the case is, he sees the man. He sees the need. He walks on the other side. Same way with this Levite. We find, too, that are so preoccupied working in the holy things and the knowledge of who God is that they fail to demonstrate it in love in this moment. Passes by on the other side. Their failure is not that they missed a need. It's that they saw it and they continued walking. And then Jesus introduces this other man, the Samaritan. Now again, for us, we hear the idea of Good Samaritan. We have ministries called Samaritan's Purse. That seems like a good thing in our world. But in Jesus' world, the Samaritans were kind of these half-blood kind of Jews. They were those who kind of kept themselves separated. There was a long history, and there was a lot of hatred and enmity between these. For Jesus' context of those he was speaking to, they viewed Samaritans as kind of the filth of the earth, almost worse than their own enemies that had often come against them. And yet it's this Samaritan who's walking by, who sees this man in need, who takes compassion upon him. Compassion is the hinge upon which this entire parable turns. And we find that compassion is not just a feeling or getting drawn towards a need and having some sense of empathy. It's actually taking action out of that emotion that demonstrates the love of Christ. What happens here is that the Samaritan sees what the other one sees, but he interprets it completely differently. The priest saw an interruption. Maybe the Levite saw an inconvenience. But the Samaritan saw a person created in the image of God. And out of that perspective, had mercy and compassion. Christian service, the kind of loving service you're called to demonstrate every day in every circumstance, embodies a merciful love that recognizes need. That's the first thing I want you to know. This embodies a merciful love that recognizes need. One of the challenges of our world is that we often allow busyness to corrupt and to numb us of the awareness of the need of those around us. In fact, studies show this. Even with the best intentions or the best head knowledge, our heart knowledge can keep us from being able to do what we need to do if we're distracted enough. A study happened at Princeton Theological Seminary. Maybe you've heard about this study, but it happened a few decades ago. They got seminary students, and they had no idea that they were in this test, but they were asked to come and present a presentation on compassion, on mercies, on hospitality. And so they invited them, these two professors, they invited a whole slew of students to come and to give these individual presentations. And as they came to the building where they gave the presentation, they then sent them out from there in 3 different groups of people along the way. The first ones that presented, they said, hey, listen, you did a great job with this presentation. What we want you to do is to go to this other building. There's some people that are going to be there in about an hour and a half, and you could take your time, but we want you to go across campus and give that presentation. They had a second group who, one-on-one, they came in, gave their presentation, and they said, hey, listen, there's some people on the other side of campus, but they're waiting for you right now. Don't rush, but you can go over there, but as soon as you get there, you're going to give a presentation. So you had a kind of slow group, you had an intermediate group, and then you had a rushed group. Again, they'd just given this presentation on compassion and pastoral care, and they said, there's some people, they're waiting for you right now. They're going to leave if you don't get there in about 5 minutes, so you need to rush across campus and give them this presentation. It's of the utmost importance. What the study showed is that when they crossed the campus, they had a setup. They had a man who was in dire circumstances between those two buildings. And the great study was to see what would the students do as they were going across campus in these different state of mind. Well, it's no surprise to you that it was not so much the content of what they knew, it was the posture in which they entered into the situation that mattered. Those who were told they had plenty of time, who weren't in a rush, 65% of those stopped along the way to help the person in need. Those who were rushed, who felt that they were busy, that they had to get there in a hurry, ignored. Only 10% of those people stopped to help this person who was in dire straits. It's not so much what we know or what we feel that matters. It's often our willingness to be present in a moment of need that happens most. The greatest enemy of compassion is not indifference, but distraction. Let me ask you a question this morning. What's distracting you? What's keeping you from serving those around you with love? Now, we all know what it's like to be distracted. We've been going places and interrupted in kinds, but we have constant distractions. Perhaps today more than any, we can be distracted in a moment's notice with a beep of our phone, with a notification, with an alert. We can phub people, right, with our phone. We can phone snub people because we're so busy and entranced with what we have in our hands that we're ignoring the needs of those around us. Every day you have people that are bidding for little needs, of little moments where they need to be known, they need to be loved. Don't rob one another of the depth of this love. Because we know calendars can fill up quickly, responsibilities multiply exponentially. All these things compete with our attention, yet loving like Jesus requires attentiveness. We're obsessed with efficiency, but what the people around us need in demonstration of love is someone who's willing to notice and take action. When we come to this place, we have an opportunity to slow down and to practice what this attentiveness looks like. To look at your neighbor and say, what's the need that must be met? Before you come to worship next Sunday, ask God to give you eyes that see people the way that Christ sees them. That's what the Samaritan did different. He saw individuals. He saw someone who was made in the image of God, and he chose to act out of that love. Mercy teaches us to care for those who others are overlooking. And we see the extent of what that does next. It says in verse 33 again, but a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where he was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. It said he went to him and bound up his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he set him on his own animal and brought him to an inn and took care of him. Now, the Samaritan's compassion is noteworthy because it moves into action. He sees the man who regards him, but look at the extent of which he goes. It says he bound up his wounds, he poured on oil wine, he cared for him personally. This is an intimate involvement. This is a personal kind of touch. He doesn't simply express concern from a distance. He doesn't throw some money at him and hope it goes away. Instead, he puts himself at risk for the sake of this one who's in need. He enters into the messiness of another person's suffering. Every action of mercy requires sacrifice. It requires us to give of ourselves. Again, this Samaritan's man, he doesn't look at what he has as something that's non-expendable. He says no cost is too great. He gives him what he needs. He says, this is not undignified for me. And think about this. He's walking this road. He has no idea where the gang of robbers is now. He puts himself in harm's way for the sake of this man. Genuine love always gives something of itself away. Christian service embodies, hear this, a sacrificial love that responds personally. Again, this is not just transactional. This is the substance of transformation. This is what we read in Romans 12, 1 and 2, talking about this living sacrifice. It's not just something that we do of ourselves for God. It's something that we do for the good of those around us to bring glory to God. The Samaritan is intimately involved in this man's story. He identified with the man in a shared story in a shared space. That's the view of what he sees in this moment. Now, I know we're in Carrollton, Georgia, and one thing I've known after living almost a decade here is we have some major Disney fans in the room. Can I get a shout out for Disney? I would say give me a Mickey Mouse, hot dog or something, but that's too weird. Amen would seem strange in this illustration, so we're not going to say that. But there's a lot of people who love Disney. And I want to tell you, I have kids. Their kids love Disney. And growing up, I didn't go to Disney a whole lot. It was a long way for me to commute. But I get it. I get it. When you go to Disney, and I get for some of you people, you're rolling your eyes. For some people, you can't stand Disney. That's you, whatever. But what stands apart is just a radical hospitality when you go to Disney. That's what sets it apart. Is that you encounter people that are willing to do just about anything to make sure you have a magical experience. And one of the things that they do if you go is they don't call their employees. You know this. They call them cast members. Now, if you see that sounds a little strange. But the reason they call them cast members is because it's a way of communicating to the individuals that are serving at Walt Disney World that you are part of a story. This is theatrical language. You're creating an experience and you're inviting others to be a part of this experience as well. And a kind of an improv action, they're told to interact with people. There's rules about distance that if you get within a certain distance of someone as a Disney cast member, you have to interact with them. You have to or you lose your job. Because it's all about trying to bring people in. And if you've been to different amusement parks, no shade intended, not everybody does this. This is what sets apart the Disney magic, is a willingness to see people and to invite them into an experience, into a story that changes the way they see things around them. Jesus invites us to be a part of his story. And far greater than Walt Disney could ever do. The service that reflects the heart of Christ doesn't remain distant, but it views others as individuals who are part of a greater story of God and intentionally, attentively engages them to draw them into a story of hope and love and care. The people around you right now, the people you have divine appointments with this week, are in need of God's love, and you're the character in the story to show it. You have a place, you have a purpose, and you don't need to allow distraction to keep you from demonstrating that. Jesus entered into your story. That's what the incarnation is all about. You can't talk about this kind of love of Jesus without talking about the incarnation, that the God of the universe stepped into our existence. He didn't stay distant, but instead he came to care for your every need. That's what Jesus did to the point of sacrificing himself on the cross. You mirror something of the character of Christ, and that should have an implication for how you interact with people as you go this week and as you come here in practice of that. We're focused this summer on being all in on hospitality. And we have some awesome folks who stand at the doors of this room, who stand at the doors of the building, who are out and about to greet people. But what I want you to know is the call of Christian hospitality is not limited to those. Every one of us are called to have our heads on a swivel in attentiveness, looking to demonstrate love to those in need. Every day, you have that opportunity. And certainly on Sunday morning, I pray that when you come to Tabernacle, that you are engaging and practicing and inviting others into the story of God. How do you do that? When you're in these halls, don't just look for the people that you know. Look for those who you don't know and go see how you can be a part of their life. We've got name tags now. It makes it a little easier, doesn't it? But it's simply trying to engage with folks, being attentive. Same way when you walk in this room, if you see somebody sitting alone, that should be, in your mind, an emergency. Every person, and I hope you're looking around, every person should feel a part of the family of God by being included. It means not just simply greeting somebody in the welcome time or simply greeting somebody when you sit on the pew next to them. It's asking them, will you sit next to me? Inviting them into your story. Those little acts of sacrifice make a difference. And it invites others to be a part of the story of God. Christian hospitality requires your attentiveness to needs and anticipation to help. For you, we need to do that. As a church, we have to do that. We do that in a lot of ways in our community. We need to anticipate needs outside of these walls. And we do that. We have partnerships with ministries where we serve in our community through THS, that homeless resource bridge, that we help those who are experiencing homelessness and other critical need to get them the resources that they need. We have it through Open Hands in the soup kitchen that help to be able to feed those in need in the community. We have it through Alice's House, which looks out for those who are in the foster family system or those who are in need of knowing God's love in that real and powerful way. We partner with people all over the world. In fact, right now, shameless plug, we're collecting shoeboxes for Samaritan's Purse. How about that? In order to be able to demonstrate a love in ways that many of us won't be able to see it, but we know that God will honor it. We have opportunities all around us, but it starts with us practicing each and every week when we come in this place, this kind of radical hospitality. We need people to experience not merely the friendliness of our church, but the formative love of Christ himself. Again, look again at the example of this Good Samaritan that Jesus tells about, verse 35. And the next day, Jesus continues the story. The Samaritan took out 2 denarii and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." And then Jesus says to the lawyer, "Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among the robbers?" And the lawyer said, "The one who showed him mercy." And Jesus said to him, "You go and do likewise." Jesus holds up this example of the Samaritan man, and we see the response of the lawyer. It's a response that all of us have to give in some way or another to this story is what do we do with this? For this lawyer, this broke down barriers he had created. It elevates a person who he had discounted. It causes them to see things differently. And for you, it must do the exact same. To see the completeness of this story, the man doesn't just bring him to the end and drop him off. He says, take this and continue to give him care. And if he has any more debt, then send the bill to me. Because the work of love never rests until God's complete love is demonstrated to this person. Christian service embodies, hear this, a steadfast love that remains until restoration. That word steadfast echoes that Hebrew idea of hesed, of a kind of covenantal love, of one that's willing to invite others into a relationship and says that this is an unbreakable bond that will continue forward. The people of Israel looked at that relationship with God, and he kept good on his promise even when they did not. So much to the point that we find fulfillment in Jesus giving himself to restore a right relationship between them and him. And it's the same for you. What we also find is that Jesus doesn't just end his work at the cross, is that he continually advocates on your behalf. And for every time you sin, he stands before the Father and he says, their debt has been paid in full. Paul writes in Philippians this way. He says, he who began a good work will continue it to the day of its completion. Jesus doesn't just save you. Through his lordship, he constantly takes care of you. And you're called to reflect out of that relationship a deep love for neighbor, for stranger, so they might become friend and family to you. John Wesley is purported to have said this. He says, do all the good you can, by all the means you can, in all the ways you can, in all the places you can, at all the times you can, to all the people you can, as long as you can. Listen, it's not about what you can do. It's what Christ has done for you. And that's what makes the difference in this kind of loving service that anticipates need. Let me tell you, you can try to anticipate need all along, but I'll tell you this. You know the best thing you can do? What can I do for you is the question to ask. If you can't anticipate need, just ask, because everybody has a need. They may not say anything, but what you know is that by simply asking what's needed, you're showing a willingness to serve. We're called to serve above and beyond by anticipating need, responding to need, and remaining committed in that work of love till it's carried through to the end. The biggest challenge for you is to don't get distracted in this call. Notice again, what does he say to the lawyer? He commends the act of merciful love, of a steadfast love, of a sacrificial love, and then always comes in a moment of teaching, a moment of instruction, a moment of example, is a commissioning. Now you go and do likewise. That's the call to the lawyer. That's the call to you. Don't give in to distraction. Show Christ's love in every action. Will you stand with me over this room as we ponder God's word?